Again, we're moving into our Dharma roundtable session. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Soun Kosetsu Randy Earl, who is a novice priest. He began formal Zen training with Taun Elliston Roshi after moving to Atlanta and joining the Atlanta Soto Zen Center. He took the precepts in 2003. Although further moves took him away from Atlanta, he continued to train remotely and during retreat visits, taking the vows for Shukai Takudo. In 2013, Soun Kosetsu has served as Zen chaplain at North Carolina State University for several years and is currently an STO member at large, supporting the STO Sangha on the board and web committee. Professionally, Kosetsu serves as an experienced manager with a successful web solutions company. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree at North Carolina State University, a Master of Business Administration degree from the University of Phoenix, and he currently resides in Raleigh, North Carolina. A few other notable things for Kosetsu. He's a woodworker. He's also a an avid poetry poet. You've seen of some of his writings in the STO newsletter, and he is also the co communications chair with me in a lovingly known as the Zen Geek Squad. So let's welcome Cosettes. As always, we're going to always start off with the opening Dharma verses. So Cosettes, go.
The unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth. Okay. Pardon me while I get so is everybody situated now? Shall we begin? I think that's a yes.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time and attention. I know it's always an effort to make the time in our personal lives to attend a retreat. It's wonderful to have everybody here and to have the opportunity to share the Dharma with each other. So today I am continuing the discussion on the precepts. That's the theme of the retreat. This is the second in terms of a breakout discussion. So this will be similar to the format that we did yesterday with Seigetsu's talk. So I'll talk for 15 or 20 minutes, then we'll have breakout sessions to discuss and then come back in group to share our discussions with each other. So let me just share a slide here. So are you seeing? Yes. Okay. All right. So this is the precepts Dharma discussion and roundtable part 2. And I always like to start with the basics, right? What are we talking about here? What are the precepts? And it's a list. It's kind of rules, maybe. But I like this definition that, in essence, they define how an enlightened being functions in the world, relates to others and this planet, and makes moral and ethical decisions in everyday life. This was written by John Daido Luri Roshi. So why should we practice them? And you know, at first glance, you could look at it and you see these rules like don't kill, don't steal, and so on. It's like, oh, well, we want to practice that to do no harm. And obviously that's true. But as this quote says, observance of the precepts is not only important for ethical reasons. As a matter of fact, I think many would make the case that that's kind of a secondary effect. The precepts are the basis of spiritual practice. One cannot progress on the path of spiritual training if heart and mind are not free from the inner malaise brought about by a careless lifestyle that is in violation of the precepts. As a matter of fact, in some Buddhist traditions, you don't start diving right into meditation like we do. In some traditions, they insist that you start with ethical practice first, with precepts work, with really striving to lead that ethical life in their mind to prepare you to lay the groundwork, a calmer mind with which to undertake meditation practice. So that is really, I think, seen by a great many teachers as the foremost reason for practicing the precepts. If you go to Master Dogen in his fascicle Shoaku Makusa, which translates as not doing wrongs, he starts with this little poem: not to commit wrongs, to practice the many kinds of right, naturally purifies the mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. So, and you know, notice that focus here, it's kind of hard to miss. It's not obfuscated in a 4-line poem, right? That it's the purpose is to purify the mind. That's the focus here. And as Husat said, I like poetry. I like poetic expression. But if you like your poems to rhyme, to be a little bit whimsical, I found another translation that you might enjoy. Don't be a jerk, do the right thing, then the mind is not irked, and the enlightened ones sing. Not only do I find that to be a delightful little poem, but it's a great translation of the sentiment into more modern idiom, right? And that's from Brad Warner's book, Don't Be a Jerk, which is his translation of not doing wrongs. So I recommend his writings as a different perspective. You know, when you dive into it, it can look as a, wow, this is irreverent, you know, to Sensei's comments earlier about, you know, or maybe being over reverential. His writings are a little bit irreverential, but they're a really in-depth analysis of a lot of Dogen's writings. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that little whimsical poem. So I'm going to go back a little bit. So yesterday, Seigetsu talked about the 3 pure precepts, and I wanted to go back to those because they form the basis for so much. And that's what I'm showing here. I'm going to draw a little diagram. I'm starting with the foundation, but they are very general, very abstract. I would say aspirational, right? How do we put these into practice? And the pure precepts start off in the sequence that's very important. First of all, do no harm. So that is what I call the prohibitive format of the Grave Precepts, that give us clear guidelines to keep us out of trouble, right? That comes back to what that previous statement was driving us towards, that it gives us a calmer basis from which to meditate and to move forward in life. So the practice of the precepts starts off with do no harm. So what do the Grave Precepts say about that? Well, as with any of our teachings, you can find many different interpretations and translations. This is one that most people are familiar with: not killing, not stealing, not misusing sex, not speaking falsely, not clouding the mind, not discussing the faults of others, not praising self while abusing others, not sparing the Dharma assets, not indulging in anger, not slandering the 3 treasures. So there's a whole lot of nots here, don't do's. That's kind of familiar to us who were raised in Western Judeo-Christian culture. So that is comfortable in a way of we're used to being told kind of what the boundaries are, right? And by the way, I'm going to say that I'm only, you know, trying to keep this brief, so I'm not going to go into any of these in great detail. I might discuss 1 or 2 as examples, but any one of these is fruit for, you know, could be a very long talk, a full retreat studying that aspect. So what I want to talk about it is more systemic, but I will give just a quick example to see how you can work with them. So as was mentioned, I work with a local university as a chaplain sometimes when there's an active Buddhist group there. And boy, college students, they are the masters of the contorted hypothetical question, right? They just love to dive into something like that. And a lot of times they will come in very proud of themselves saying, I am a vegan, and that's great. But when we dive into the discussion of examining, well, why did you go vegetarian or vegan? Well, I'm not a fan of killing animals. Okay, fine. But do you drink milk? I guess maybe vegan shouldn't have been my example, maybe vegetarian. I'm not sure the exact definitions. And what I learned when I was in college, and my girlfriend, you might think that drinking milk is fine, the cow wasn't killed, but my girlfriend in college, her kind of part-time job was she was tracking genetics for the School of Agriculture, and we went to the university dairy farm and we were recording all the calves, and to generate milk you only need the females. What do you think happens to the male calves? They are disposed of. So there's death involved in that process, even for drinking milk. And then we go into the discussion, invariably there was somebody that said, well, I drink almond milk. Well, that's great. But let's look at, the production of almonds. You can find of a lot of materials, articles saying that that's a very water intensive crop. And where they are grown in California, the agribusiness is taking what many consider to be an unfair share of the water available because they are upstream, whereas communities downstream feel like they're not getting as much of the water as they need. So perhaps that has shifted into another precept area of not stealing, not taking that which is not given freely. Perhaps that water allocation for the almonds is not given freely. And that is not, in that brief example, my point was not to find fault with anybody who drinks almond milk or anything like that. It's to show that there's no easy answer, that really the precepts are there for examination and for deep questioning. So to move on so that we're not spending a lot of time going into these examples, because like I said, you can really get deeply involved in those. To move on in the pure precepts, after we talk about not doing harm, then we're directed to do only good. Okay, well, that's a bit trickier, right? So what is good? And Segetsu raised that question. How do we know what good is? So I like to turn to a slightly different form of the precepts, which I call the dual expression form. And you might have seen these where the expression is a little bit different. The first one being affirm life, do not kill. The next, be giving, do not take what is not given freely, and so on and so forth. So each one of those covers a spectrum now. Instead of just a prohibition, do not kill, now we have an affirmation or an aspiration, affirm life. Okay. And this is very useful because, back to the telling you what not to do is great. It kind of gives you boundaries, but then it's not very helpful in going forward. Now with a statement like affirm life, wow, that's very open-ended. There's a lot of possibilities there. What does that mean? How do I affirm life? And you can very quickly start thinking of many examples of ways to affirm life. And okay, how would I manifest that? How would I do that? So I really like this dual expression form of the Grave Precepts in terms of moving ahead in taking the precepts further into your interactions. And I want to give a couple of examples here, just like I did on the previous page. And first of all, you're probably familiar, or you may be familiar with the fact that in the initiate ceremony, Jukai, we only take the first 5 precepts. Okay, it's not until we move to the discipleship stage in Zaikatukudo where we take the next set of 6 as well. And when we look at those, we can see that those really are involved in more in the complexities of dealing with other people in society. I mean, obviously, do not kill, do not steal. Those affect your interactions with other people, but in a very clearly defined way. Whereas the other 5, this is much more kind of gray area material. And let me give an example here. Number 6, see only your own faults. Do not discuss the faults of others. I had a team member at work. I was asked to take on a team a few years ago. And one of the members of this team was a little bit of a prima donna. And I don't fault him greatly for that. He was young and experienced, talented. So that's the kind of trap that a lot of people can fall into. They've got a skill, they've got a talent. They know they're good. People recognize them as being good at that, but then they take it too far and aren't willing to listen to the inputs of others. And it's, again, back to youth and inexperience. So I could have focused on, but in his case, it was starting to become disruptive. Team members did not want to work with him. Projects did not want him assigned to their project, and so on. So I could have focused on his faults, and there were, you don't want to ignore them. There were opportunities for improvement there, but how would he know what he needed to improve upon? That's where I was looking at, what are my faults in this situation? I'm his manager. I need to be his coach. I need to be his mentor. If I don't do that appropriately, I'm not only letting him down, but I'm letting down, the other members of the teams at work, of the projects, and even the clients. So there's always 2 sides to a relationship, and that aspiration to see only your own faults encourages you to examine your side of that relationship as well. So there's just incredible opportunities for examining ourselves and our practice here. By the way, picking that one, see only your own faults, that sounds very, very closely related to Dogen's admonition that to study the way is to study the self, right? So that is the best way that we can become aware of the action of delusion in our lives, is looking at our own life. There's plenty of examples there. Looking at the next one, know self and other as one. Kuasan talked to us last night about a practice of compassion, where you start visualizing people at different in different relationships in your life, and kind of an expanding sphere of starting with those closest and easiest to those that are farthest away and most challenging. I want to say farthest away, I don't mean geographically, but maybe in terms of opinions, political views, so on and so forth, things that make it more challenging for you to feel compassionate about them. That is a wonderful exercise. Really, again, not focusing on the negatives. Do not praise yourself at others' expense, but really trying to kind of put yourself in their shoes and understand their situation. That's something I have done over the years and found extremely helpful. And actually, I have done that with my teenage son, who has had some issues where that has been a very helpful exercise. So to continue looking at the pure precepts and building our model here, the top of the pyramid is doing good for others. So putting our intention into action, which we already started talking about, but the Grave Precepts really start focusing in on individual realms of action, which make it much easier to to really get into that. Okay, how do we actualize, in some translations, how do we actualize good for others? How do we do that? So we, in my mind, the way I have to do these things is I have to think about, okay, if I'm going to do something, if I'm going to take an action, especially if it's something I'm going to have to do over and over again, is there a process for that? And this is where I'm going to reiterate that I need to form mental models. I like visualizations, as you can see from my little pyramid here. And I'm going to do that again. I'm taking maybe a little bit of a liberty. This is the model that works for me in my mind. And it's kind of a cycle of practice. And Kosetsu mentioned this very briefly in her talk last night as kind of a side comment, but I could tell she was thinking the same kind of way. And as if with any cycle and any circle, you have to start somewhere. I'm going to start with vows. That's the title of our retreat, Vows in Bloom, right? That is setting our intention. But what do we do then with that intention? And this is where I would say we work with the precepts and the paramitas in terms of putting our intention into action, because those are the guidelines and the aspirations for how we take those intentions into the world. Okay. Then how do we know whether we did that appropriately or not? Right. We in some of the previous talks, we mentioned that, the best of intentions can have unintended consequences. We cannot take our lives into the world lightly. We have to do it carefully and with consideration, and we won't always get it right, but we can always get some feedback if we are open to it. And I would say that is our Zazen practice, seeing reality and the results of our actions. I want to reiterate that this is not kind of an analytical, okay, I'm going to sit and I'm going to think about the day and I'm going to analyze these interactions and what happened. That's not what I mean. But when we sit in shikantaza and we drop off body and mind, and our greed, anger, and delusion fall away, those fogs fall from our eyes, then we can more clearly see the impacts of others, of our actions, see more clearly reality. At least that's my experience. So I see that as very clearly my way of seeing the effect of my putting my intentions into action. And as we know, we're not going to get it right all the time, right? So then we need to take responsibility for our actions and their effects. And that's the repentance, right? That acknowledgement and acceptance of, yes, I screwed up here. I need to do better next time. And so often when we find ourselves in a situation like that, we need help. Where do we get help? Well, we take refuge. We find the support we need in the three treasures, in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And that gives us the foundation from which to take our vows, setting our intentions to go forward. And we go through this cycle again and again, as many times as needed. At least that's my model. And as with any with any metaphor, you can take it too far. It doesn't have to be strictly sequential like this, but in general, this is how I see these aspects of our practice fitting together and supporting each other. And for my mind, that model works. I hope it's somewhat helpful for you. So how do we practice the precepts? Well, I heard Sensei say over the lunchtime that you don't apply Zen to your life, you apply your life to Zen. And I think that the precepts are perfect for doing this. They touch every aspect of our lives. So they are the ideal method to apply our life to Zen. So that's all I had prepared to say. I do have some prompt questions for the breakout session, but before I do that, I thought I would see if anybody had any questions that might help provide a clarification for the rest of the group before we go into the breakout sessions.
Ikuse.
Hi, thank you for recognizing me. My question is, it's about balance. All this very thoughtful, not just analysis, but comprehensive, taking in the teachings, trying to apply them very diligently, and wanting and being sincere in that effort. I somehow find it difficult to balance it with just the other side, which is that of that this is a practice of experience. In other words, oh, you have great intentions, so you go out in the world, but in that moment, in the moment of experiencing every interaction or whatever, tripping on the sidewalk, whatever happens in each moment, we're also supposed to be in that moment. So I don't have a very neat or pat reconciliation for these two aspects.
I think that's a perfectly valid question that we all deal with every day. Is, it sounds great to have these highfalutin principles, right? But we can't always plan in advance. We do have those moment-to-moment situations, right? We run into somebody in a cheese shop, to shamelessly borrow from previous talks, and we haven't planned in advance, and we say whatever we say. And I think that's why I use this cycle model, is because we can then, see the impact on that, see maybe what our motivations and our drivers were, and prepare ourselves for the next time. I don't think we can be perfectly ready for every situation in the moment. We can do the best we can. I think with time we become more aware, more understanding of our motivators and the motivators of others, and to be able to respond appropriately. But that's what I find forgiving about this cycle, is that, it's not a once and done, I blew it. It's every day I get a new chance to live the precepts. And I guess I shouldn't have jumped to questions. I realized that I kind of ran long, so we need to go to the breakout session. I'm right. So sorry.
No, that's okay. But Sensei Tashim, if you want to say something briefly before we go to breakout rooms.
If you're practicing a martial art like judo, and you're in the middle of a match, and your head is full of opinion, such as I should be winning here, not losing, or full of thought, you can't react fast enough. So I think the question is, when you get up off the cushion and then you walk into your daily life, are you remaining empty of opinion the way you are on the cushion? Or are you going back into normal mode of think, and then all of a sudden it catches you by surprise because you didn't see it coming? So I think the more empty we are, the more we can see it coming, rather than having it surprise us. It's like an old friend coming around the corner again. Oh yes, here is anger. Or oh yes, here is greed. So we're not taken aback. We saw the move coming, just like a judo martial artist sees what their opponent is about to do, because they're not blinding themselves with their own opinion or their own fears. If we have the fear that we're going to look stupid, we're sunk before we start. If we can set down the fear of looking stupid, how bad can it be? We look stupid all the time anyway. Then it's a lot easier to live our life. Right.
And to extend that metaphor, if I may, in the martial arts or in many things like that, you're practicing again and again and again. You're building muscle memory. You're building intuition, things like that. And I love that we call what we do practice, because I think that's exactly what we're doing as well with mental muscle memory, so to speak, to prepare us for those kinds of situations, so that we don't have to think about it consciously, that we have built those responses in.
Nice. All right. Now, again, this is oftentimes for great discussion. So we want to move into our breakout sessions. Everyone, welcome back. Thanks so much for participating. Give it 1 second to allow everyone to come back into the room for our harvesting.
So you're not teasing with us? We don't really have another 7 minutes this time?
No.
Okay.
See, I did not touch the keyboard this time. So
As always, we bring this back to additional harvesting of our knowledge. So which group would like to go first?
I better do mine before I forget it. I'll just start. Yes, we did really well. Everybody got to speak. I forget how to pronounce her name. Ikusei. She decided after listening to Kosetsu that precepts kind of present themselves as a life koan. And she really appreciated his idea. It really helped her when everybody said, just be ready. It might not even have been Kosetsu who said that, but to be ready. She talked a lot about a gap that she perceives, and that perhaps, and some of the other comments kind of address that. So I will move on to what Seiyu said about setting intentions, that he feels that when he sets an intention in the morning with the precepts, that's good. And because he practices Zazen over the course of his life, the intention begins to be a part of his life that he doesn't have to monitor as much. It starts to take care of itself in a sort of natural way. It manifests itself more easily the more he practices. And if I've missed anything, please let me know. Marie Dean had a really interesting thing. It was kind of like Kosetsu's circle. And hers, she kind of views it, if you view time as a linear thing, she starts noticing when she's broken something, and we view that as the past. And then she can work for the next time, which is in the sense, again, being ready. And then there she is. And as this circle continues, she finds her way to vow and repentance. Did I miss anything? Oh, and I guess Seiyu did talk about actualizing harmony. He spoke a little bit as not indulging in anger as being one of his hardest precepts. And somebody did say, well, you're allowed to be angry, just don't keep feeding it. So that he was like, oh, that's wonderful.
I'm really working with my teenager on that right now.
That's what he said. You should get together. So thank you.
Thank you
Wonderful
so much,
thoughts. Thank you.
Group Kuo-san. Who's next? Segetsu-san, and then Ketyer-san.
We led out with a comment from Gyozen, who really liked the structure that was proposed. And I think I definitely second this. And he said that this really reinforces this being an organic practice. And he mentioned that the mind rushing to make judgments is a specific problem. It's like having a muscle memory from old practices, and that practice really is a key issue here. Practice helps us build the muscle memory to do something different than we might have done previously. Zenku talked about the most broken of the precepts is the desire to criticize others. And that this desire can depend very much on our deep interactions with each other, where we can look at this and think about it and correct that tendency. Enmo was particularly taken by the almond milk example, where the unintended consequence of water being used to produce almond milk has, so to speak, downstream effects upon others. So that doing good in one area may not result in good being done in other areas. I noticed for myself that the issue that I have the most difficulty with has been mentioned by several others. I do tend to think I know better than others about what political choices should be made. So I'm very critical of people who I think make wrong decisions or voice wrong opinions, which makes it really, really hard for me to get along with one of my sons-in-law. And so my practice there has been not to say anything to correct him, but on the other hand, I'm continuing to make that same judgment over and over again in my interactions. So for me, this is a case where practice is not making perfect, but it does lead me to reflect on the need to be less judgmental. So one of the comments is that we tend to see about people, we tend more to see people than we see about, well, I can't read my own note on this, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Saget-san and group. And Katsuryu-san group.
Yes, our group consisted of Walter, Pam, and Sangaku Sensei. And our discussion followed kind of the cycle of Kosetsu's model, which we found very helpful. And then also the chat question around defining the problem and establishing a method was an important beginning. And then the other point that was brought up in terms of our working with the precepts, of course, is that we're often dealing with a situation that doesn't meet our expectation. We're often dealing with failure and the difficulty of absorbing failure into our lives. We didn't use quite that word. Sengaku and Walter made the point, though, of it's necessary to have a certain amount of perseverance, not so much faith, but perseverance regarding the next moment, where we do have the opportunity to do something more positive, leaning more towards the precepts, leaning our behavior and our mind towards the precepts. And we're all on a different spectrum. People in the group are at various points with the precepts. And then I think finally we sort of came to the idea or agreed with Randy that the getting help from others was essential. And Sangaku had a very nice summary of that. He talked about this was turning the wheel of the Dharma, just dealing with what is presented to us. And if we're continuing to work on our vows, be conscious of the precepts, over time they become a part of us and they become more automatic. Inculcated was the word that he used. So that was kind of our overview, our quick impressions of your talk, Kosetsu.
Thank you. I just want to make a quick mention that I appreciate the mention of perseverance. In the model, we were focusing on the precepts, but in the action I had / the paramitas as well, and persistence is one of the paramitas. Is it virya, I believe? Yes,
energy.
good point.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ketchuru. We have the two T's left. Who's up? Sensei Tashin, excuse me.
Jisho will summarize our group. Jisho, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I was with Tishin and Kevin, and our discussion we sort of zoomed in on a few of the precepts. I brought forward that something about the 6th and the 7th precepts, the way that they relate to each other, interact with each other, to not discuss the faults of others and to not praise oneself at the expense of others. And the word humility came up for me as a kind of, both of them feel very deeply linked to humility. And Tishin brought forward, the idea of gossip, and how, some small detail can be seized upon, a fault, for example, of someone else, or a perceived fault, and conclusions are drawn, and that people operate in this way, very different from, for example, how our justice system is supposed to operate anyway, with all evidence on the table, prosecution and defense, and all of that, which is maybe attempting to be nearer to the precepts, although in action it often isn't. And then Kevin brought forward anger. Well, he wasn't angry, but he brought forward the precept relating to anger, and the difficulty of that. And the word harboring anger is, I guess, another translation that he found very, very helpful. He was talking about how anger is in a sense his oldest friend, that it almost sometimes feels like you're having tea with your anger, because there's some kind of satisfaction in indulging in and in harboring and in stoking that anger. And then we just talked a little bit about how anger is the only directly named emotion among the precepts. There's nothing directly about fear, anxiety, sadness, these other negative emotions. So something about anger is particularly potent, particularly a hindrance, I guess. So that's where we were.
Thank you, Jisho-san.
Very good observations. I really liked, when you find something resonates with you or you feel it strongly, like humility, as Dogen says, investigate this deeply. I think that resonates strongly with intimacy, to use another term here. So I encourage you to investigate that deeply.
Yes. And last but not least, Tassin-san's group.
Well, I'm afraid we didn't agree, or we didn't even discuss having somebody take notes. So I'm just going to sort of extemporaneous here, if there is such a word. I was really struck, and I looked to. So we had Amy, Matt, Moko, and myself. what was so striking is the universality of everything that are called out in the precepts. There isn't a person amongst us or anyone that we're ever going to come in contact with who is not living through either holding to the precepts or not, whether they even know about them or not, whether we're caught up in anger and greed, all this. And the universality of it is really very touching. And one of the things that I believe it was Amy mentioned is something that was rather poignant in first becoming familiar with the precepts is becoming sensitive to it, of becoming sensitive all the times that we become angry, all the times that we possibly should have reached out for a contribution or compensating somebody for something we've been helped with and maybe we didn't. All these things that perhaps we just sort of glossed over in the past. Now we get to actually, through trying to observe the precepts, observe our behavior and see all of these negative things that are just sort of continually bubbling up, and we're trying to deal with it. And I think we all fall short. And I think that it's so important to, as we were saying, to take refuge in the precepts, to repentance, take refuge, and in the Sangha, and start over again. We've practiced our whole lives just reinforcing and being reinforced by all of these negative elements in our life. And it's a conscious choice that we're making to move in a different direction and to actually, as Master Dogen would say, take the backward step, right? And catch ourselves. Because it's so easy that, like that anger, to indulge it, it feels good until you have to live with a lifetime of consequence of it. But to have that moment that Zazen presents you to where you can see it and you have the opportunity, you have a choice to react or perhaps to go in a more positive direction. So these are some of the things that we talked about. Just it was such a wonderful discussion. I felt very uplifted by our conversation with Amy, Matt, and Mokuo, and thank you so much to them. And if they have anything they want to just shout out here, I'm just sort of glossing over things.
Awesome. Thank you to Sensen and group. All of your comments have been very enriching and really helps to uplift our practice. It takes the precepts for Kosetsu talk into more of a experiential stage, and we all benefit from our feedback. So I'm going to circle back to Kosetsu and let him have closing remarks before we do our closing Dharma verse.
All I can say is that this is a wonderful example of why we want to do this kind of breakout discussion, because the precept practice is so deep. Everybody's experience is, it's interesting to hear about the individuality of, an individual person resonates with this or struggles with that, but then the universality of it as well. How many people brought up dealing with anger? And yes, I'll join that group too. So I think it was wonderful that I didn't try to give a quick read on each individual one, but to let the groups do that and and come up with their own insights, because they were all very, very valuable.
Awesome. Kosetsu, as always, thank you so much for your teaching, your wisdom, your knowledge. You create a space of allowing us to be able to partake the Dharma. And thank you so much for what you bring to us. And now we'll move into our closing Dharma verse.